Hey James, thank you for joining me on this very special podcast because today we're going to be diving deep into Toyotas.
Cool. Hey Roman, glad to be here.
This is for all of you guys who don't know James. He is the founder of the Colorado FJ Club, one of the founders.
One of the founders, yeah.
Yes, and he is probably the foremost. Is this fair to say, expert on off-roading Toyotas?
I wouldn't say nationally.
Locally.
My experience, kind of the title I take for the club is I'm the trail guru. I moved here, as we talked about in previous videos, I moved here 11 years ago for off-roading. My first year here, I was in the mountains 26 weeks.
Hey guys, before we get into today's podcast, let me introduce you to Dirt Legal. Dirt Legal helps owners of dirt bikes, ATVs, and UTVs acquire a state-issued street legal license plate that allows these off-roaders to be driven on the street. So no more need to waste time loading up your truck or trailer, driving it to the trailhead, and then unloading it. Now you can simply ride or drive straight to the trail. Here's how it works. Send Dirt Legal your bikes or UTV's information. Dirt Legal then handles the paperwork with the DMV, all for a few $100. And at the end of the process, you'll receive a new title and a street legal license plate, an updated title in the mail. Simple, right? To learn more about how Dirt Legal can make your off-roading rig street legal, go to dirtlegal.com. That's dirtlegal.com. This year, spend less time loading and unloading all of your off-road toys and more time on the trail.
I have run pretty much every named trail of substance in the state. Some of the trails you do once, I don't ever need to do that trail again. Other trails I do every year. Just that you find the ones that are good. But yeah, I've done pretty much every named trail in the state, and I have a little bit of I'm terrible with names, I'm terrible with faces. I have a photographic memory for trails. Like if you show me an obstacle, and this is a fairly famous spot, what we've got here on the video is a fairly famous spot, but I see pictures of trails.
Imogene,
yeah, that's the rock on Imogene. But I see pictures of somebody doing an obstacle on a trail, and I go, that's the third obstacle on such and such trail, and everybody's like, wow, how did you know? I just have a memory for it.
So if you guys are fans of TFL, you'll note that we did a video, maybe it was 2 years ago now, where it was a buyer's guide for the FJ Cruiser, where we featured your 4Runner, which is up here on the rock, and we talked about everything to do with FJ. So in this podcast, guys, we're going to be talking about both, not just the FJ, but of course the 4Runner, and we'll get into the new Tundra as well. So if you love Toyota and you love off-roading, this is going to be like a love letter out to you guys. Yeah. But before we get into all that, I got to say, James, I was there not that long ago, and I was terrified to drive up on it and not back up on it, drive up on it, because for those of you who are watching this, you'll see James's 4Runner up on a rock, but what you don't see is that there's probably a 1,000-foot drop.
It's a couple hundred feet. Top of the world in Moab is a lot more.
Right.
But it's still enough to squish you at the bottom. Sure.
And when you drive up there, you get this funny feeling, in your gut. Yes. And it starts to tingle. And part of it is like you want to floor the accelerator because you want to just go like Thelma and Louise it. And part of it is like I want to live, so I don't want to Thelma and Louise it. So I actually didn't even drive up there because I was like, I don't want to do this. But you backed up there.
I backed up there. So I have to give this credit to my friend Max, and I'll have to tell Max to listen to this so he'll get credit for it. The traditional photo here is the vehicle pulled out forwards. And you can see the back of the vehicle, and people pull out forwards and then take the photo. My friend Max backed his FJ onto it and had just the perfect clouds that day. And it always seemed to me to be the better photo, backing out onto it. A little side story, and what I was telling Tommy before, the first time I actually met you guys was before that video we did about your FJ, which you guys were on a media press run for the 2019 TRD Pros.
That's right. Yeah, we were in.
I was your trail leader for that.
Yeah.
And if you watch that video, if you go back and watch that video, there's a couple of clips. I'm wearing a green shirt.
I remember.
And a hat, and there's a couple of clips where you can see me. I was spotting all the factory trucks out onto that rock, and I had a fun interaction with. The photo guy that was on there. I had made the suggestion. It was like, hey, if you've ever seen people back out onto this rock, it's like the best shot. And he was like, yeah, we're good. And then he pulls all the factory trucks out there, face out, and then all those guys leave. And then everybody else that was in the rest of the group, because you guys went and did lunch and Telluride after that, everybody else that was in the group, I backed my truck out and they were like, we want to take that picture.
Yeah, it's a spectacular location.
Yeah.
And like you say, outside the top of the world, where it's a sheer drop.
Yeah.
This is both of them will kill you.
Yeah. So
you're not going to survive going over.
Oh, no. And the funny part is I stand, so if you can see, there's a little, right on the passenger front tire, there's like a little notch there.
Yeah.
So I spot people out onto that rock when I'm not pulling my own truck out there. And I was telling Tommy before.
I'm getting that feeling just looking at this picture.
Yeah, I don't, it's funny because I off-road, I don't like heights.
Yeah.
And when I'm walking out there to spot people, I never take a step backwards. If I'm standing where I'm at, I'm telling you, come on, right? I'm guiding you this way or that. I say, stop. I turn around 180 degrees. I walk forward to where I need to be. I turn back around.
Just walk.
Because I'm so worried that that'll be the last trail I ever do.
All right. Well, let's talk trucks and cars. So let's start. We'll do this. We'll start with the FJ because obviously that's near and dear to your heart, and then we'll transition over to the 4Runner, which is basically an FJ in 4Runner clothing, and then we'll end up with the old and new Tundra. So if you guys are out there and thinking about buying any of these, we'll talk values, we'll talk upgrades, we'll talk performance. So we're going to go deep into the Toyota world. So let's start with the FJ. The FJ was manufactured, I believe, from 2007 to 2014.
Correct.
Right? My knowledge is limited, so I'll let you fill in the holes.
Sure.
Based on the same platform as the 4Runner.
Correct.
And it's still in production in places like the Middle East.
Yeah, they still sell in the Middle East. Yeah, Dubai and yeah.
And it was designed here in California at the Cali Studios.
I think that's right. We had on our Colorado FJ Cruisers Facebook page, we had one of the designers on there, Jinwan Kin, who, he's had spoke about that. But yeah, he lives here, I think.
Yeah. So it was. I'm pretty sure it was designed at Calty. And what they did was they infused what is basically a very kind of traditional
FJ40 retro.
Yeah, with a retro look, and made it cool and badass.
Yeah.
And then for some mysterious reason, they pulled the plug, just like Nissan did with the Xterra, right before like the whole overlanding took off, right?
Right.
Which is typical Toyota.
Right.
So what's the magic in the FJ?
It's the first purpose-built off-roader. And when I mean purpose-built, I mean they can all off-road, but the shortest wheelbase, the best approach and departure angles, really, the best off-roader that Toyota has made, in a long time. I mean, certainly the Land Cruisers are fantastic vehicles and they go all around the world and that stuff, but for just like the closest thing to a two-door Jeep, basically, is the FJ, and that's been the case for a long time. Certainly, I would never. A lot of people call them rare. I would never call them rare. The sales numbers. I mean, you're talking nearly 230,000 vehicles over that span.
And most of them are the 2008s, I think, right?
Yeah.
Usually what I've found is that the first year a vehicle comes out is when they sell the most.
Right.
And then by like 2014, they were maybe down to like, I want to say like 17,000.
13
units.
or 14,000 a year.
13 or 14,
yeah. The first 3 years were half of all the FJ sales.
Yeah.
So 50 to 55,000 the first 2 years, and then 28,000. And then after that, every year after that was 13 to 14,000, like clockwork. When I first came into the scene, I had a 2011. When I first came into the scene, it didn't make sense to go try to buy one that was 2 or 3 years old that had some miles on it. Like it was the cost difference was marginal to where we would tell people, just go buy a new one. Like there's no point to get one with a little bit of miles. And that was even then. And I was giving out this advice constantly of, just go to the dealer and buy one, or if you're gonna try to find one, do this, do that. When they discontinued in 2014, then the demand almost immediately everybody was like, oh, I gotta get one.
Now that I can't have one, I gotta get one.
Right. And the funny thing, even back then, I mean, it was still the number one for the last 3 or 4 years. Kelley Blue Book does a thing where they do top resale value. It was the number one resale value vehicle for like the last 3 years that it was made. And then you go to now. I mean, they're more they're more now than they ever were new.
Yeah, I think one just sold Bring a Trailer for like 80,000.
81.5, yeah. It had 63 miles.
Which
and it wasn't even a Trail Teams. That's the crazy part.
Yeah.
If it was a special edition truck, that thing's going 6
So
figures.
let's talk about kind of the changes to the truck and what makes it iconic. So I think what makes it iconic is they did a lot of really cool. Not just retro design, so it doesn't just harken back to the old FJ, but they did the clam style doors, right? They did the white roof, which is really cool. They did the 3 wipers. They did the inclinometer and the little. What are the little?
There's an inclinometer. Yeah. There's a directional gauge
compass,
on there. Yeah. And the funny thing about the inclinometer is you get people that sometimes they'll do something where when you go past 30 degrees, the 40-degree mark will be something profane.
Okay, yeah.
Saying, but yeah. But no, interestingly enough, the only vehicle that, they could put that in the 4Runner. It'd be a great little add-on, but it was just something unique that they did for the FJ that's really cool.
And then the running gear, of course, and the transmission and the engine were straight out of the 4Runner.
Straight out of the 4Runner. Same 4-liter V6 as the 4Runner, same 5-speed automatic as the 4Runner. The main difference on the FJ, you could get a manual. It was a 6-speed manual, which also changed the whole system to full-time all-wheel drive rather than 2-high, 4-high like what you get in an automatic FJ or an automatic 4Runner. The manuals, obviously, it's a slow, boxy vehicle, so it's not, doesn't make it any more sporty, but it's a better vehicle for bad weather. As you know, in the bad weather here, if you have a vehicle that's 2-high, 4-high, you're always waiting until you start slipping before you put it in 4-high, where the manual FJ just has all the traction all the time.
And then, of course, they gave it, some of them you could get option out with a locking rear diff, which I suspect are the ones that are more sought after now. Yeah. And then they also did like an upscale-ish sound system, right, where you can get a bass, a JBL thumper in the back. Yep. And then my favorite actual touch design-wise was that they color matched the exterior to like these plastic panels on the inside. So if you got a yellow one, you had yellow interior matching. And then the seats were very basic. Yeah. It had this big kind of almost baseball-like shifter, which is pretty cool. Yeah. And relatively, simple infotainment, radio. I think toward the end, I think ours had I think they got rid of the CD player. I think it had Bluetooth at the end of it.
They had Bluetooth for a while. Yeah. They never. It was kind of seen as a down market 4Runner. So Toyota intentionally made choices to make it less than a 4Runner. So no factory sunroof, no factory leather, no factory heated seats, no factory nav. It was very much kind of the rougher younger brother of the 4Runner, and in that way, if you want some more of the creature comforts, you end up in a 4Runner versus an FJ.
And then the ones that people really wanted were the trails teams. Yeah. Tell me about those. What did Toyota do?
Sure. So the trail teams was for every year was largely an appearance package. Mm-hmm. They were mechanically the same as any of the rest of them. So locking rear diffs. All the same traction stuff. You get a little bit of lift and a little bit of different wheels and tires, but those you can replicate all that in the aftermarket. The main thing from an appearance perspective was on the stock FJ, you got a gray bezel, gray like center grill bezel. You got gray corners on the bumpers. You got gray mirrors. You got gray door handles. You got the white roof. The trail teams, all of that stuff is now black, like everything else on the outside of the truck. So a Trail Teams truck typically is 2 colors, black from all the plastics, and then whatever the color is of the truck with a matching color roof. So that the entire truck is one color painted and then black. And it's just a simpler, better looking version of the truck versus the non-Trail Teams was more of the throwback with the white roof like on the FJ40.
So what year is your favorite? Is there?
Mine was a 2011, and I'm a little biased. It's as you can see in the photo here, a lot of Colorado is green. Some of it's gray too.
So it had that army green.
Yeah, I had the army green in 2011. I liked that it was, not to say that it was camouflage, but I liked that it blended in. The first year of Trail Teams, 2007, it was called a TRD, not a Trail Teams. That was black. White was 2008. 2009, they didn't do a Trail Teams. 2010 was like a sandstorm, like a tan color that looks really good somewhere, desert, Moab kind of place. 2012 was red, so not this exact red. It was a non-metallic red.
Not Barcelona red, right? Because Barcelona red is,
I think it was radiant.
Barcelona red is the other color.
Yeah, I think this one actually. I think our 4Runner here is Barcelona
Barcelona
red.
red. It looks like it. Yeah.
2013 was a cement gray color, and then 2014 was what they call heritage blue.
And how much of a premium do they carry right now?
In the used market, for auction, so an auction quality, like a collector quality vehicle, it's substantial.
5,000, 10,000?
For a very low miles example, more than that.
Really?
What you're seeing is kind of low miles. So I mean, in the 3-digit range, right? Hundreds of miles. You're seeing these cars that are these FJs that are going in the 50s to 60s at collector, at kind of collector grades. Where Jerry Seinfeld's 2014 Trail Teams sold for, his had 6,000 miles. It sold for, I think, was $67,000. So substantially more miles, but with his name attached to it, but then also the color there. But no, the hardest FJs to find. Like if somebody came to me today and they really wanted to challenge me, they would say, I want a 14 Trail Teams manual, and that's the manuals were. We don't know the exact number. I think it's around 10%. Nationally, anywhere between 6 and 7% of FJs for sale at any time nationally are manuals. I assume Toyota likes round numbers, so I just round that up to 10.
Okay.
But the manual Trail Teams cars are hard to find because the Trail Teams were about 2,500 trucks a year. And then if the manuals were 10% of that, that's about 250. So
That's a lot.
Yeah, so the manuals don't really come up for sale very often.
And we'll talk about values in a second, but let's talk about we've talked about the upside, so let's talk about the part where there are issues. So for me, the biggest issue with the FJ is they're thirsty, right? That 4-liter is just a thirsty engine. I mean, you'll be lucky to break into the double digits. No, that's not true. Into the 20s, yeah.
Stock on the highway, you're lucky to get 20, 21.
Yeah, you'll be lucky. You'll probably more like 16 to 18.
Yeah. My truck here, so with a little bit of lift, the bumper exposes the front tires for a little bit of wind resistance. Those tires, I'm normal driving around, I'm getting 16 all day long.
And then there are frame rust issues, right? A little bit.
So not like the earlier trucks. I actually got fussed at when we did that video last.
Yeah.
So Toyota had famous rust issues. They had a treatment problem. And the Tacoma and the Tundra in the early 2000s. The thing is, these trucks, if you drive this in salt water on the beach, or if you live in Ohio where they salt the roads, these trucks will rust. Like any vehicle will rust, right? Anything made out of steel will rust. So then you treat it and you coat it and you make sure you take care of it and all that stuff. So I wouldn't say for a truck that's lived somewhere like Colorado its whole life where it's fairly dry, your truck that's out in the garage, right? You've got on the frame, on the welds, you've got a little bit of just surface rust that's visible there. But in terms of like chronic rusting issues, it's something to check for. It's not something that I would say, you can't, don't buy any FJ ever because they all rust. If you get one from a place that doesn't use salt on the roads or you don't live near the ocean, they're perfectly fine. You do see a substantial number of them that do have rust issues because it is a 4-wheel drive vehicle that people use in bad weather where they salt the roads. The two ways that I typically spot rust on a vehicle, if you see the under hood photo, right? People pop the hood. There are small metal parts under the hood that will rust near the ocean. So if you have like salty air, so you can spot those things and go, oh, this vehicle lived near the ocean because it had under the hood. The salt from the road isn't getting up under the hood and doing all of this. And then you get the pictures underneath, and it usually just takes, if you can get a picture of each of the 2 frame rails, and then the front suspension from like the corner, you can see whether or not the truck's got rust. I've seen really, really bad examples where it's rusted all the way through and the vehicle's not safe to drive. And then I've seen examples, my own truck, that just lived here its whole life and just had a little bit of surface rust and it wasn't worth any concern.
So in terms of optional things you could get on them, you can get the Trd Exhaust, I believe, right? That was one of the options.
Yeah, catback exhaust.
Yeah, that came from the factory. You could get those, right?
I think it was included on some of the Trail Teams packages.
Yeah, they had the TRD,
Yeah, but it was a pretty cheap, and I actually have the same exhaust on my 4Runner. It was a pretty cheap upgrade. I think it was like $350 or $400, and it's a catback exhaust, a couple of hangers, a couple of bolts.
Sounds good.
Off and on. It does sound good. The nice part too, and you can't see in this photo of my 4Runner, but the nice part is rather than exit the rear and get crushed on the bumper if you drop onto something, it exits behind the passenger rear tire.
Yep.
So it's kind of in that triangle
where
it's in
where
your
the tire is
bumper.
going to go over the rock or whatever it is. Yeah.
Right.
Ours. So we have one. For those of you who aren't aware, we have one that we bought about 2 years ago. It's that kind of gray color, and it had 53,000 miles on it. And 2 years ago, we paid the market, which was 33,000.
3.5,
Yeah, 33,000 something.
You paid below market, if I remember right.
think?
Yeah, you got a great deal. Yeah, and it's on that video.
Yeah,
that
it was like 33.5. I think we paid.
Yeah,
for
I think
it.
yours was. I think I said at the time yours was the cheapest for its year in miles of anything comparable within like 500 miles. So you got a really good deal on it back then.
And the only thing that we did to it is it didn't have that Baja style roof rack, so I found one of those. I just thought they're cool.
Yeah.
It feels like you should have one. So I found one. I think I paid $100 for it.
Yeah.
They're out there, and then just put it on the roof. It just fit. It came off of an FJ.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, especially with the Jeep world, customize there. So you did a lift on yours. Obviously, there was a whole aftermarket of parts that you could do for it.
Right.
Kind of talk to me about what are the typical upgrades that people would do themselves.
Sure. So that truck, and this is true for the 4Runner as well,
Yep.
the sweet spot for the lift on these trucks is a 3-inch lift, 2.5 to 3-inch lift, and 33-inch tires. And for Colorado, I have done every trail easier than Blanca Peak, which back when trail damage was a thing, Blanca was like number 13, number 12 hardest trails in the state. And out of that 12 or 13 trails, 9 of them are buggy trails, 2 miles or less. Like you're going out there for body damage. So you can really do a lot in this state. Again, my experience is in Colorado, not everywhere, but you can really do a lot of the trails here just with a 3-inch lift, 33-inch tires, and some armor. Where the problem comes trying to go bigger than 3 inches, 3 inches and 33s. 2 problems. First off, it's an independent front suspension vehicle. So you're ultimately limited by how much displacement can you have between the differential side of the front CV axle and the axle side.
I can hear all the Wrangler guys and gals out there
right.
going, solid axles.
Right. Well, and the funny thing, that's why the Land Cruiser 80,
my beer.
the last FJ 80 Land Cruiser, that was the last solid axle Toyota off-roader you could buy. So the values on Land Cruiser 80s are crazy precisely because of that. Now they have a terrible powertrain. It's an inline V6 it's an inline straight 6 with, I don't know, low 200s of horsepower or something, but it's a heavy vehicle, but you can lift them to the moon. You can put huge tires on them. With these, the CV axles, the independent front suspension limits what you can do. You can drop the differential if you need to. The most common 6-inch lift on these has all these spacers and extenders and things that just...
Really going to mess with the geometry of that front suspension.
Yeah, and some of the stuff to do that 6-inch lift is very difficult to undo. So it's one thing, you put a 3-inch lift on, you don't like your lift, put another 3-inch lift on. It's another thing to buy one with a 6-inch lift and then try to go back to a 3. Yeah. No, the sweet spot for these, 2 reasons, the differential, number 1, and number 2, Toyota doesn't, if you look at the wheel well size, especially in the front where you've got, the tire moving in all different directions up and down, Toyota doesn't really put enough space for big tires.
And I should mention, a lot of this is identical to the 4Runner. So, I mean, we're talking FJ, but it's the same chassis, it's the same power plant, it's the same transmission, same suspension. It's just a different top on it.
Yeah, and you have the same limitations. You have the same body mount problem in the rear. What I was looking at on your Tundra before, where the sway bar arm comes out and then kind of curves back in, and if you go another 2 inches bigger on the tires on the Tundra, it's going to have the same problem.
You're going to roll,
I feel like it's a design thing from Toyota's perspective, and it's actually something I raised. 2019, I had when I was at FJ Summit, I had a couple of Toyota engineers in my truck, and they were asking about questions about the 5th gen as they were working on the 6th gen. And one of the issues I raised was that, the size of the wheel wells. But the other issue I raised was the spare tire is under the back deck on this thing. And if you go bigger than the 32-inch spare tire, there's a decent chance that your spare won't fit.
Yeah, then you got to put it on the roof, and then you got
put it on the roof, or you can
changing your your center of gravity, and it's just creating all kinds of havoc. I hate. It looks cool, but I hate tires on roofs.
Yeah. Well, there's aftermarket bumper options too, but I mean there's a great company in Utah that makes bumpers, Expedition 1, which is what the front bumper is on here. To get their dual swing out rear bumper, and they make quality stuff. I love their products. It's a very expensive rear bumper to put the tire on the back.
How
like
much
that.
are we talking?
I think it's the mid $3s.
Yeah,
like
high
$2s. By the time you powder coat it
Yeah.
and you add options and mounting stuff and all that stuff, it's not cheap.
Yeah.
It's worth it if you wanted to go 6-inch lift and 35s on a 4Runner. That's kind of the things that you have to do that. But that's why I say the sweet spot with the FJ and the 4Runner platform, 3-inch lift, 33-inch tires.
What size wheels?
17s.
17s.
So you can 17s on the 4Runner. You can do 16s on the FJ. You can't do 16s on the 4Runner because the front brake calipers are too big. So the 16s won't fit, but the 16s will fit on the FJ. The nice part is the smaller the wheels you go, the more tire you get, more sidewall you get, so you can air down.
You get a cushier ride.
Right.
Okay, so obviously there's all kinds of aftermarket support. So front bumpers, winch-ready bumpers. I noticed you've got a winch on yours. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the rear bumper. Same thing with rock rails.
That I've got on there,
Yeah, I noticed. Those are pretty cool. They're pretty wide. Mm-hmm. What kind of tire do you prefer? People love having this tire argument. What's your kind of go-to tire?
So the fun part about tires is a never-ending debate, as I'm sure you know. My tire of preference is the Goodyear Wrangler DuraTrack.
Okay.
If you go to your average off-roading event, and you look at the tires that everybody has. And again, I'm coming at this from having been doing this now for about 11 years. The thing about the DuraTrack, and it's not unique to the DuraTrack. There's a lot of tire companies that have copied this thing before, and you can see the treads a little bit here. The innovation of the DuraTrack and any tire that's similar to it is it's a hybrid tread. So it's got a mud tread on the outside and an all-terrain tread on the inside. And when you get these like solid mud tires, right? You know the types, right?
Yeah.
You drive
BFG
around
mud terrains.
Yeah. You drive them around the road. They wear out because they're on the road. They wear out, and they wear out kind of evenly. But the big knobbies, it's just a whole bunch of big knobbies. With this, you've got the all-terrain tread in the middle that handles the road wear a little better. But if you had all-terrain across the whole thing, if you remember the old BFG AT, the KO1s, right?
Right.
Those tires were notorious for, if you get them in mud or you get them in snow, they didn't have the gaps between the treads, so that when you would get in stuff that would stick in the tire,
it wouldn't self-clear.
It wouldn't self-clean. Yeah. So that's one of the things that this tire is kind of a compromise between all-terrain and mud, where it's got some gaps on the outsides where it'll self-clean.
So anybody following you will love you when you get off the trail and you've been in a muddy trail. You're going to just shower them with the rocks and mud and dirt.
So DuraTracks were kind of the first hybrid tread to do that. What you see now is there's several manufacturers. Nitto makes one. Cooper makes one. There's several companies that make a similar type of tread tire where a mud tread on the outside.
I also find that they're not too loud, right? The other problem with mud terrains is they're pretty loud when they're on the highway. You can hear those bad boys.
Right. Yeah, these are louder than average, but you're right. Yeah, they're not as loud as a dedicated mud. Before I had these on my FJ, I had Nitto Trail Grapplers, which were the Nitto mud tire. Okay. And those were loud.
Go ahead.
And the worst thing about the muds, especially, so if you notice the rocks here, I mean, this isn't Moab. These aren't smooth rocks, right? These rocks are kind of jagged. They tear these tires up. And if we zoomed in on this photo and looked at my tire tread, every edge on every one of those treads you can see is rounded off and torn up because of the rocks. Yeah.
And what protection comes on a standard FJ? What kind of skid plates do you get?
So the factory skid plates are, I want to say they're a 16th inch aluminum. Yeah. The way I typically...
Pretty useless.
Yeah. It's basically you're following behind another car and the car kicked up a rock and you don't want that rock to go through your oil pan. The way I usually explain it is they are not designed to hold the weight of the truck.
Yeah.
The skid plates I've got on here, and you can't really see them. There's plenty of companies that make skid plates. If you're in Colorado listening to this, there's a great company called RCI that's up in Loveland. You can drive there. You don't have to ship. As you can imagine, 200 pounds of skid plates is expensive to ship. Yeah. So they're one of our club's local sponsors, but they also make a great product, and they're local, so you can go pick them up. But the main choice with the armor, the factory armor, 16th inch aluminum, hit it with a hammer, it'll dent.
It's cosmetic.
It's largely just like a small rock getting kicked up and not hitting your oil pan. When you get to the point with off-roading where you're starting to hit, you can't rely on those things. If you drop your truck on a rock,
and you will,
the rock's going to go right through it. And then whatever it's protecting.
I'm always like, when I did that, we just did a video where we took the Bronco in the snow, and I end up actually high centering it on a rock. I didn't know there was a rock.
Yeah.
And then the first thing I always do is, anything pouring out of it? Okay, good. Nothing's pouring out. We're good. As long as there's nothing pouring out of it. I'm like, okay.
Right.
Anything else I can live with.
Right. So one interesting difference between the 4Runner and the FJ. So speaking of armor, the armor choices are basically aluminum and steel.
Yeah.
The aluminum is nice because you don't have to worry about it rusting. The steel you do have to worry about rusting. So
And it's heavier. It's it's heavier. Aluminum
it's heavier. Yeah, it's lighter. The steel is more durable, so the aluminum will bend.
And scratch.
Will bend a little more, and scratch a little more. I usually get underneath my truck twice a year with Rust-Oleum, just and spray all the.
And going back to your lift, what lift do you recommend? Who do you use?
Mine personally. So I have an Old Man Emu.
I was going to say Old Man Emu seems to be the go-to.
And mine are the BP51s. So they're off-road racing, remote reservoir suspension. So there's kind of two tiers. Not really three tiers, but essentially there's two tiers of lifts. There is the remote reservoir off-road racing, Fox, Icon, I'm forgetting one, Old Man Emu, King. Sorry, King is who I was forgetting. Yeah. So at that tier, you're talking about suspensions that, and it depends on production numbers and all that stuff, but for the FJ or for the 4Runner, you're talking about suspensions that typically start at about $3,000. The other tier, kind of the opposite end of that, is just a coilover shock. Some use foam, some use nitrogen, that kind of stuff. You can get those as little as about $800 or $900, like a base Old Man Emu suspension for about $900. Typically, when you go with a bumper and a winch, you want something that's got, if you see the threads on the collar, they can be height adjustable. Depending on the order of operations of how you mod your truck, the worst way to do it is to lift your truck and then decide to put a bumper and winch on. Because you got the height right without the 200 pounds of bumper and winch on the front, and then you add that stuff on, and now the front did this, and then you have to mess with it like that. So that's really the function that the adjustable suspensions serve, is that they allow you to, you either
level it. Level it.
Level it and adjust it. Yeah.
What would you say to somebody who's looking at? Let's talk about prices. What would you say to somebody who's looking at buying an FJ now? So I've been on Craigslist, and people go to like Bring a Trailer. I don't go to Bring a Trailer. No disrespect to Bring a Trailer, but the prices there are always like, I would say at least 10%, if not more, above market. Right. Whereas Craigslist, I think, is a realistic of where the market is. And I've seen FJs as low as $10,000 with 300,000 miles on them. Yeah. And then, it goes up from there. Mm-hmm. So what would you say, is there a sweet spot for somebody who wants an FJ but who doesn't want to spend, new car pricing for one? Is it still possible to get one that's at a used car price?
If you look aggressively, you can get one under $20,000.
And don't look in Colorado because there's a premium here.
Right. Yeah, there's a premium here, like we talked about in the previous video. The Gulf states, anywhere where it doesn't rust, where 4x4 is unnecessary, that's kind of where you want to look.
Hey, I forgot to ask you, did they make them in two? I think they made them in two-wheel drive too. They were two-wheel drive, right? I've seen some in California.
Yeah. So the joke,
those are cheap.
Those are cheap. The joke with the California, not the California trucks. The joke with the two-wheel drive trucks is that these vendors, right, these companies that make off-road parts would go to the dealership, give me the cheapest FJ you can give me, right? Yeah. Okay, here's a two-wheel drive that we can't sell anyway. They give them that. They throw $30,000 worth of mods on this thing.
Oh, God.
And then it looks like the biggest, most awesome FJ you've ever seen in your life. And then when you find out, you go look for the transfer case lever and it's not there, and you're like, I'm going to buy that to off-road, and then, I can't off-road that. Yeah. So that's the joke. It's just kind of a stereotype of kind of what I saw with the two-wheel drives, but we do occasionally.
So don't get fooled.
Yes, don't get fooled.
Make sure it's four-wheel drive.
Definitely look for the transfer case lever. And I think I said this when we did your FJ video initially was, we occasionally get on the forums, we'll get a question of, I bought a two-wheel drive FJ, now I want a four-wheel drive FJ. Can I upgrade my FJ?
Oh, God,
it's like, no, you're never. Right. Go trade it in.
It'll cost you more to do that than to find a four-wheel drive.
Yeah,
and it'll break.
Yeah.
All right, so let's say you can get one for what you say.
So the thing I would suggest, and this goes back to, so I'm as we talked about in the previous video, I'm the author of the buy sell guide on FJ Cruiser forums. So 2 points I'll make, and we'll get to the GX in a minute.
Okay.
Because the GX messes all this up.
Okay.
There's a $10,000 decision that you make basically when you're looking at an FJ, and it was $10,000 6 years ago when I wrote the article, and who knows what the number is today. And it's basically this: you either get a high miles early truck, so 7 to 9, right? In 2010, they upgraded the motors on these things. They added a little bit of horsepower. They changed some of the emission stuff.
Did they do something with the frame too? I thought there was some.
No,
they beefed something up in the drivetrain.
It had it was the rear differential went from 8 to 8.2 inches.
That's right. Yeah, they beefed up the rear.
Right, and then there was a thing with what they call fender bulging on the forums, where when it flexes it would bulge the inside. But they fixed that, I think, in the 09 to 2010 renovation. But basically, the thing I suggest is if you're on a budget and I want the best FJ I can get, and I don't want to spend more than $20,000. The truck you're looking for is an 08 or an 09, but most likely an 08, because they get cheaper the older they get, is an 08. The reasons you don't want an 07, there's a lot of 07s out there.
There are a lot of them. The first year,
there's a lot.
They sold a lot.
Yeah, and I have friends who off-road a lot with 07s. And one of the issues with the early 07s, they had some problem with the metallurgy in the rear differentials where they go through differentials. So I have one friend who...
Which is fine unless you're on the trail.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. In which case, disconnect you're driving out there.
You could probably drive it in four-wheel drive back to the back to the repair shop, but you're not going to do that on the trail.
Right. So no, I recommend 2008.
Yeah. Search
nationally. And whatever you can, you probably won't find one local. That's just kind of how hard they are to find these days. But that's if you want to try to get an FJ under $20,000.
All right, I'm gonna look.
Okay.
While we talk, I'm gonna look. See if there's any. I bet you there'll be some in Colorado.
Okay. That's a stretch. We'll see.
Yeah.
So basically that $10,000 decision is you want a 2008, 175,000 miles. You should be able to find one of those under 20. You should be able to find one that that wasn't in a salt state, doesn't have rust. Look in Florida, look in Texas, places like that. Sorry about that. Look in those places that don't have a history of rust, and just search nationally. Plane tickets are cheap. Gas is relatively cheap compared to what you'll save versus trying to wait or find one locally. The $10,000 decision, and this comes directly from the buy sell guide, is basically an 08 with 175,000 miles for $17,000 versus a 2010 and up with all the improvements, the best version of the FJ they ever made, all the improvements with 100,000 miles for $27,000.
All right, so I'm on Craigslist.
Okay.
And I've got basically every one that's for sale by owner, from like Colorado Springs up to Greeley, so the entire Front Range. That's my. So there's a bunch here. Okay. So there are choices, not a lot. So there's a 2010 FJ for sale, put up 3 hours ago.
Okay.
It looks a little rough.
The paint's a little rough. Yeah.
The paint is definitely faded.
Yeah.
It's got 178,000 miles.
Okay.
And no accidents, clean Colorado title. They say 25,600, and the paint is really faded. Excellent mechanical condition, new windshield, but it looks pretty rough, dude.
I mean, people can ask crazy prices. How long it'll be there, who knows?
That was put up 3 hours ago. The interiors actually hold up really well.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, the interior's in good shape. And I'm looking here. Actually, look, it's got the locking rear diff.
Yeah, there you go. So it's a dark color. It was probably parked outside. It was sun faded, basically.
Let's talk about A-Track. When did A-Track come?
So A-Track's been there the whole time.
Okay.
So A-Track is basically, it uses the ABS sensors to detect wheel slip.
Yep.
It's the same thing if you're an older off-roader, which I am not, but I've learned this kind of in person. It's the same thing as left foot braking, basically. So you put a little bit of pressure on the brakes, you have a little bit of pressure on the gas, and then the tire that's slipping gets braked. Now, I think the 100 series was the first Toyota, 100 series Land Cruiser was the first Toyota to have this. They went from a single channel ABS. So basically all the wheels are on the same channel, and if you had any slip, it would pump them all. They went to a 4-channel ABS. So each wheel is monitored independently for slip. And when if you're in like a panic braking in bad weather, water, rain or snow or whatever, and you slam on the brakes, if one of your tires is slipping, the 4-channel only pumps. We've all heard the sound that bump, 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 bump. It only brakes that corner that's slipping. A-Track takes the same thing and applies it to when you're on the gas instead of the brake. So when you see this when you off-road, you get in a tilty situation or something, you get a tire that's off the ground, usually one of the front 2 wheels that's off the ground. you raise that up rather than do the standard open differential thing where all the power goes there to just spins. You'll hear the brake pump on that corner, and it puts that energy back into the rest of the system. Just stay steady on the throttle. And for our terrain here, for rocks and things that are rough like this, usually you stay on the throttle enough and it'll go. So to your question about when it was added, it was in the 2007 trucks, but they didn't include the button.
Oh.
So the trick, they call it the A-Track hack for the early trucks, is get on the internet, go to Amazon, buy an A-Track button from Toyota, and put it in your dash. There's a plug in the back.
And there's a hole, right?
Yeah, and plug it in, put it in one of the holes, plug it in, and now you've got A-Track. It's been standard. It's had a button 2008 and beyond.
All right, I'm going to say this is a scam.
Okay.
All right. So it's a 2012 with 34,000 miles.
Is that a red Trail Teams?
It looks like a red Trail Teams, 16,000. I'm going to go with. Take a look. I think that's a scam.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason I'm guessing it's a scam because A, it's too cheap.
Right.
34,000 miles, 16,000 seems too cheap.
Right.
And B, on Craigslist, I always look for the license plate, and if you don't see the license plate, it's always a red flag.
State.
Yeah, or because then you're like, where was this picture taken? And what scammers do is they steal a truck that's actually for sale, and then they just create a fake Craigslist ad. So, so I doubt that one's a real one.
Too good to be true.
Yeah. All right. Now here's one that I think is true.
Okay.
It's a 2011 FJ with let's see how many miles. Where are the miles here? Oh God, this guy's an FJ dude. 63,000. This might be right.
Sounds like your truck. You sure that's not your truck?
Yeah. Yeah. And let's see if I can see a plate. I don't see a plate, but the plates are kind of hidden. Yeah, I see a plate.
Okay.
Out of state, which is always trouble.
Yeah.
So he's asking $32,000.
For the mileage, that's not a bad deal. If it's real.
Yeah, if it's real. Iceberg white. This is always a little scary. Okay. Please read the entire listing, and that's the entire listing.
Oh my God!
I know.
Is it mods or what?
It's all kind of WeatherTech floor mats. 2 owners, 0 accident. Second buyer took ownership at 30. I mean, this guy knows his FJ.
Yeah.
And it's not. Look at that. Where is this? I don't think this is even. Yeah, it's in Denver. It's in North Park Hill. I think that might be real. What do you think?
Could be. Yeah, it's not way too good of a deal. That's a pretty decent deal for the miles.
So now we have a 2010 yellow, 10 days ago, 6-cylinder, 74,000 miles. There's a lot of clean ones here. 29,900.
10 days seems like a long time for a decently priced FJ to be for sale in Denver.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe prices are coming down, or maybe we're just you never know, right? You'd have to call on these things.
It's reasonable.
Yeah.
If you search nationally for that truck, and that's
he's hiding the plate with his finger. I love when people do that, right? When they put their finger up on the
right.
as if somebody walking down the street can't see your plate, right?
Right. Yeah, it's funny. This picture is probably the most famous picture of my 4Runner, and it's all over the place. And this is one of the backgrounds on my LinkedIn.
What do you think of those lights in the bumpers?
I want to say those are Japanese market. I don't know if they were a mod for the Japanese market or if they were original Japanese equipment, like the fog lights. Like the fog lights for Japanese FJs. I mean, you can buy those parts and bring them over here. The other thing that the Japanese FJs do, if you've seen on Japanese market, on JDM cars, they have that little mirror up on the front corner where you can see kind of in front.
Right.
In front of the vehicle, yeah. So that's kind of a fun JDM mod. Some people
I think it's real. I think this is real.
Yeah. So coincidentally, the last year, so Jeep guys often call FJs M&Ms.
Okay.
Because they're these bright, colorful, blue and yellow and all that's red and the yellow was one of the M&M colors from the early days. 2010 is actually the last year of Sun Fusion, so that's called Sun Fusion. 2010 is the last year of that. So it's always deceptive because the sales numbers for 2010 were, pretty low, 14,000 trucks. So most of the time, the vast majority of the time when you see a yellow truck, it's an 07 or an 08.
All right, here's the last one for sale. It's 2007. 4-wheel drive, 163,000 miles, 17,999.
There you go. Any mods?
No. It looks like he's got a rooftop, or she's got a rooftop tent on it. Hard to say. Here, take a look. You can see
pretty stock.
Pretty stock.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, that's definitely a rooftop tent. It's got a sunroof too. That's aftermarket.
That's always trouble. A sunroof is always trouble because aftermarket ones will always leak.
Yeah.
Give it enough time, it'll leak.
Yeah. It appears to be a pretty decent looking truck. It's got a CB in it.
So do you miss yours? You gonna buy another one?
No,
No.
I miss the color. And I think we talked about this in the last video. My wife picked this color. And I have nothing against the red. The red's perfectly fine. I like the green just because that red clashes with the background, right?
Yeah.
And I prefer something that's a little more camouflage. But I have a funny story about that actually. I had some Toyota, a guy who worked at corporate in Plano, and his girlfriend, and they were there in another red truck, like another red 4Runner like ours. And I actually, before we bought this truck, they were at the Detroit Auto Show. They were going to announce the next year's TRD Pro color, and it was in January of 18. They were going to announce the color at the Detroit Auto Show. And they had used, for the TRD Pros, they had used every other Trail Team's color from an FJ, but green.
Oh.
And I'm like, it's definitely going to be green this year, right? So, I wake up that morning, and I had 14 texts on my phone. Hey bro, it's I think it was Voodoo Blue or Heritage Blue. It was one of the blues.
Oh, I love Voodoo Blue.
It was one of the blues, yeah. And I was like, well, that's it. I'm not getting my green 4Runner, because we had made a decision we were going to go ahead and do the 4Runner, but we were waiting to see about the green. So we go to the event, and that was for the 2019 truck. This is a 2018 4Runner. We go to Summit. There's a guy in my group who has a red, fairly bone stock, and his girlfriend, wife, I forget, she was asking all these questions about, this mod and that mod. And when you work for the manufacturer, most of their vehicles are kind of leases, right?
Yeah.
So they're like, you don't want to modify the lease too much. So I let this lady drive my truck from, if anybody knows the trails in Ouray really well, it's the bathroom stop kind of at the top of Mineral Creek between there and Animas Forks, that mine, that ghost town there. I let her drive my truck for that stretch. And, she loved it. It was built in what you see in its current state, and had a great time and all that stuff. And so I was talking to the guy, and I told him the whole story about, yeah, man, Detroit Auto Show, I thought it was going to be green this year. And, and we waited, and he got this look on his face like he knew something.
Okay.
And I saw the look on his face. I'm like, what? And he goes, it's going to be green next year, which was the 2020.
Yeah.
And when he told me that, I was just like, oh, man. So then, of course, I jokingly asked my wife, hey, can I do all this again, but on a 2020? No. So, yeah.
All right. We promised to talk about 4Runners, so let's switch gears on 4Runners in case you guys are more into 4Runners, because obviously they're still for sale. There's a lot. And let's start with the fact that there are different trim levels on 4Runners. And actually different fascias on them, right? So there's the kind of the on-roady one, the limited, right? Then when you go off-road, there's a TRD off-road, and then of course there's a Top Dog TRD Pro.
Right.
So which of those, if you want the sweet spot, which of those is it?
And
the SR5. So SR5 limited, off-road, Pro. Am I missing any?
I think that's right.
Yeah. I think that's how it goes.
There was a Trail series last year. It was kind of unique. It came with a special cooler. It was like a Pelican cooler.
I remember that. Yeah. In the back. Yeah.
And it said 4Runner across the top. Yeah. I will admit to spending a non-trivial amount of time on eBay trying to find one of those, by the way. But I haven't bought one yet. But no, if you're going to buy it to off-road like I did, right? To buy the TRD Pro and then mod it doesn't make financial sense.
I agree.
Unless you're buying the TRD Pro for the color. So the TRD Pro usually has a unique color. Voodoo Blue or the Army Green or whatever. Now, typically, once they do the TRD Pro in a color, then the next year they put that color in the rotation.
Into the regular, so you can get it.
But it's not a Pro, yeah. No, the sweet spot for these, if you're going to off-road them, is the TRD off-road. Mechanically, it's everything about the Pro. Doesn't come with a lift, wheels, tires. It comes with the stock versions of those, right? And I'll actually, it was that first day that we met when we ran imaging. There was one of the Toyota marketing folks was there, and she was looking at my truck and came over and asked me, "Why didn't you buy a TRD Pro?" So I rattled off for her. The suspension on this truck was $2,500. The armor was another $1,500. The bumper was $1,500. The winch was $500. So I just rattled off this list for her. And we paid, and again, this is 4 years ago, before the craziness, we paid $37,000 before tax, title, and license for this thing. I put 11 in mods into it. So I'm 48 into this thing, not including tax, title, and license. You try to buy a TRD Pro anything in this state, and it's retail, please, So I basically was into this the same amount as what I would have bought a TRD Pro 4Runner for, and it's a better truck.
So I love the 4Runner. I always forget how good it is. It's one of those like if you haven't seen a good friend of yours for a long time, and then you get together with them and you're like, oh, I remember why, we had so much fun, right?
Yeah.
And I feel that way about the 4Runner. It's just a really, it does everything well except for fuel economy once again.
Right.
And it's funny because I actually like the older 4-liter in the 4Runner much more than I like the 3.5-liter in the Tacoma.
Oh, yeah.
I think the 4-liter, even though it's thirstier, and paired to the ancient now 5-speed, is actually much better than the powertrain in the Tacoma, which is its Achilles heel.
Yeah.
So it just does everything well, right? I mean, it's a great off-roader. It's a great around town. It's the right size. You can, have it as your only car, or you could have it as your second car, and if you want to mod the thing, it's just one of those quiet cars that does everything well.
Right.
And I completely agree with you. Like I remember, and I haven't priced them, but I remember here in Colorado, before all the craziness, before COVID, TRD Pros were like 50 plus.
48, 49, 50,
Yeah, depending on, and then the dealer was upmarking them for another $10K. And then our local dealer here, and I've seen, and I don't know what's happening now, but they were building fake TRD Pros. I remember.
Oh, really?
I remember they've since been sold, but I remember going to the dealership on a Sunday when they're closed, and I was looking at the TRD, and I'm like, wait, hold on, that looks wrong, right? And it had the TRD Pro has the skid plate on the bottom, right, and it's like stamped into it.
TRD,
this one just had it like stitched on the, and I'm like, wait,
oh,
I thought it was stamped into it.
Oh, funny.
And so they were doing fake.
Yeah. And
then the TRD Pro has the TRD Pro wheels, and this one they looked like TRD Pro wheels, but they're expensive, right? So they didn't have the real TRD Pro wheels.
Yeah.
So you're right. The off-road is exactly the place you want to be, I think, with.
Yeah. So and sharp people with very sharp eyes will notice the grill on the front of this is not the TRD off-road grill. This is the TRD Pro grill. I think it's about $500 in parts to switch out the grill. One of the things, so the black bar across and then the largely spelled out Toyota there is kind of something that they do on the FJ as well. And one of the trends on the FJs that people started doing a few years ago was they would paint the Toyota logo on the front the same color as their body color. So if you notice, it's painted red where it says Toyota on the front. Just a nice subtle, it's gray normally.
I like it, yeah.
Just a nice subtle detail.
It's nice.
But
it's classy.
I will admit to having sat in front of a number of trucks with touch-up paint and just painting every letter of Toyota. But fortunately, I got to do that before I put it on my truck. So
now I think the issues with the 4Runner, of course, is that it's been around forever. And let's face it, new product is the lifeblood of any car company. Mm-hmm. And after a while, people just get bored of them, right? They're solid trucks. And there should be a new one coming like 3 years ago.
Right. Well, so interestingly enough with these, so the first year of this, so this truck is basically, there are very small changes, but it's essentially unchanged since 2010. There was a facelift, I think, in 2014. They added KDSS and a couple of other things. They added some of the Toyota Safety Sense stuff in 2020. But largely, the truck is largely unchanged for that time period. If you look at the sales numbers, these were selling 40, 50,
and they're still selling.
Well, but now if you look at the trend, they went up year over year for like 10 or 11 years.
Crazy.
Yeah. To where and you think of it from kind of Toyota's perspective, it's like,
why?
We sold 140,000 of these last year. We sold 40,000 of them the first year. Why should we change a thing?
Well, I could answer that because Jeep's selling 250,000 Wranglers every year. So I mean, the lifting tide raises all. But if you had a new one, you might be selling like 80,000.
Right.
So that's a simple answer.
Right.
We haven't talked about, and I haven't actually mentioned this on purpose, engine modifications. And the reason I haven't mentioned it is because, what makes these trucks so magic is that they will go. You saw it here in Craigslist, 300,000 miles, right? And the second you start messing with turbos, superchargers, you can do it, but you're taking the longevity. You're taking the thing that makes it so magic, the DNA of Toyota, and I think you're wrecking it. And it doesn't need it, right? You're not going to be rolling on 44s. Like you said, the sweet spot is 33s, plenty of power on 33s.
Right.
And then the other thing that happens is once you start upgrading the engine, then you just start snapping things downstream, right? Then the diff starts to go, the drive shafts, the linkages all start to just. It's not a good. I don't think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I would say the interesting thing about living up here, and this was that same, in 2019 when I had those engineers in my truck talking about the 5th gen, one of the things at this point the Tacoma had already come out. It had been out for a couple of years with the 3.5, and it was having all those like transmission shifting issues where they wasn't quite figuring out where to shift at. One of the points I made repeatedly to those guys was we were very worried that you're going to put the 3.5 in the next version of this. And the problem is curb weight on these is about 400 pounds more than a Tacoma. So when you put the same motor in a Tacoma that's already underpowered, and then you put the same motor in this thing with 400 more pounds, that's a problem. Now, for us up here, and you experience this, with all the vehicles you guys review, we're at 6,000 elevation. So we're 25% less horsepower up here, especially with normally aspirated vehicles versus like down at sea level. To me, the 4Runner feels like a vehicle that's perfect at sea level. And then you get it up here.
It's pokey.
Yeah.
It's pokey. I agree. It's pokey. It's pokey, and you got to get into the gas to get in. And it doesn't, that engine doesn't love to rev particularly.
Right. Well, and it's a truck too. So it's not, if it was a sports car, it'd be one thing. You rev it up. But that I-70 going west out of Golden, that rise, you hit that rise out of Golden and you're going up for the next 2,000 feet. That area there, it really strains these vehicles, engine and transmission temps. If you have any way to monitor transmission temps on these, that's something where this and the FJ have a problem because they don't have a dedicated trans cooler. So it's cooled in the radiator, kind of the bottom of the radiator, like most manufacturers do these days. And the trans temps on these things, I've seen trans temps at 225, 230 degrees, just pushing, having the truck at 71, 72 miles an hour.
Yeah, I would say they're not great tow rigs.
No.
You're right. There is a lack of power. But once again, I don't think slapping a turbocharger or supercharger is going to fix that. You can do it, but I think you're going to create more issues than you are going to solve in the long run.
Yeah, the 2007 to 2009 FJ had a factory supercharger. I think Magnuson ultimately made it.
Yeah, Magnuson made them, and so did the Tundra. Those are very sought after. Yeah.
And then in 2010, when they changed the engine, and I don't know the engine.
And Tundra walked away from those. Right.
They had so at FJ Summit 2012 they had an FJS concept which was supercharged, and it was Magnuson and Toyota was working with them on all the ECU tuning. And then a couple of years later, they didn't really do anything with it. And at some point, Toyota said, "We're done with this project. Magnuson, you can release this if you want to." So if you want the closest thing to a factory supercharger for the 10 and up, it's the Magnuson, which is actually the same supercharger that goes on these. There are a couple of brands, URD, I think those.
And how much more horsepower does it give you?
I think it's 30 to 40 horsepower, but it's a good bit of torque too.
Yeah.
But the nice part of it is, and that's kind of on a dyno, but the nice part of it is too, is that it fixes the lack of oxygen up here that we don't normally have down.
Yeah, we love turbos.
I agree with you though about kind of modifying the truck for this elevation. You start to strain things that the truck wasn't designed to do. And these are very reliable vehicles precisely as they've been built. The more you modify it, the more you lift it, the more you do all these things to it, the less of a Toyota it is. So if you're buying a Toyota for reliability and then you change a bunch of Toyota things to make them not Toyota, that's when you tend to get away from, you start to have reliability issues with those parts that aren't Toyota.
Now, we just came to our studios with the new Tundra because we just towed the Black Series here. Mm-hmm. And as you know, Toyota has gone to a twin turbo V6, which puts out over 400 horsepower. Yep. Wouldn't that be fun to stuff into a 4Runner? Or you can go the other way. You could look at the RAV4 Prime, where you have electrification, and you could, for the next one, actually, get more power by having a pretty good sized battery.
Right.
And I'm hoping that either one of those two options will be there. I think because of the way the world is moving, at some point Toyota is going to have to change that 4-liter. It's probably it's done. It's Walking Dead. It's The Walking Dead.
Yeah. When this truck is done, it's done. There's unlimited speculation about what it's going to end up with. If you looking at Toyota's lineup, they want to use that 3.5 block and everything. So then it's a question of, do you put a hybrid on it? Do you put turbos on it? Do you put both on it, as with the new Tundra? I with this truck, and if you look at rewind 3 years, and if you look at Toyota's product lineup, what you've got is vehicles that have the 4-liter 6, Tacoma, FJ, 4Runner, vehicles that have the 4.6-liter V8, so the low-end Tundra, and the Lexus GX, and then vehicles that have the 5.7, so the Sequoia, the 200 series Land Cruiser, the Lexus LX. That was kind of 3 tiers of engine that allowed Toyota to kind of stratify and say, oh, you want a tow rig that can fit 7 people? Buy the Sequoia, right? You know, if you can get a third row in a 4Runner, it's a tight fit, but you can't tow with it, you know. So they kind of seems like they kind of design their products in a way where, depending on what your requirement set is, well, your vehicle choice is obvious, right? It's not, you don't have multiple choices. It's, I'm gonna get that one. Going to the 3.5 block limits their options for kind of how many different engine choices they can have. If I had to guess, the next version of the 4Runner will be a 3.5 hybrid.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm with you. With a small battery, you know, because I want to say the TRD hybrid, and I forget now, but it's like a 1.5 kilowatt hour battery, if I recall. You know, it's nothing like the Prime. You're not going to drive in all electric mode on it. It's basically gives you more torque and allows you to do things like run the air conditioning when the motor's not when the engine's not running.
Yeah, I was surprised with the LX 600, so the new F300 series Land Cruiser. I was surprised they didn't put the top tier engine, the turbo hybrid, in that, because that would give them room to then just do the twin turbo in the GX. And then have the hybrid version in the 4Runner below that. I was really surprised that you can get a more powerful engine in a Tundra than you can get in a Lexus LX, considering the price difference.
Yeah, I drove that not too long ago. I don't know if you saw that review, but that is the last Toyota I want to take off-road. You can,
right,
but you don't want to.
Right.
Especially the new Ultimate trim, which is what they're calling it, right? Where it's like now they're competing with Range Rover and G-Wagon, right? Those people don't take their rigs off-road.
My friend Dustin bought an LX 570 that he off-roads extensively, and I mean he bought it at 60,000 miles for a fraction of what it sold for new, and that's the funny thing about the Lexus off-roaders is that they sell new to somebody's wife or something, and then 5 or 6 years later some overlander grabs it.
I was going to show you this image I just got sent to me, except now I can't find it. But it was interesting because somebody sent us a spy photo of where is it here? Come on, of what they think is a Land Cruiser in disguise, right? It's covered testing in Michigan.
Oh, I think I saw. What was the state? It didn't have Michigan plates. It had another state's plates on it.
No, this just came. There it is.
It had all the spy camouflage stuff on it?
Yeah. And so of course we know that the new 300 series Land Cruiser is for sale in other parts of the world.
Not here, yeah.
But not here. We get the Lexus version of it only.
Right.
But I got to tell you, dude, right now, the Heritage Edition of the Land Cruiser, the 200 series, those things are selling like 30 to 50 over sticker, if you could find one used.
Yeah.
I mean, I keep saying that if, Toyota does this stupid thing where, you walk away from an iconic vehicle at your own risk. Mm-hmm. And I know they were only selling like 3,000 units a year, which isn't a lot. But it was and is the thing that holds Toyota's off-road DNA.
Right.
As much as I love, the Tundra, as much as I love the 4Runner, the RAV4, the FJ, it's really the Land Cruiser that holds the DNA. Like the Wrangler holds the DNA for the Jeep brand.
Right.
And when you cut that, when you sever that umbilical cord.
Right. Well, and that's the funny thing when you travel a lot more than I do around the world. When you go around the world, people don't off-road Jeeps. Right.
No, they do Land Cruisers.
Yeah, Land Cruisers.
Or Hiluxes.
Right. So,
and the Hilux, by the way, Hilux completely different from the Tacoma.
Yeah.
I actually was at the Geneva Auto Show and they unveiled the current generation of Hilux. This was like 4 years ago. Yeah. It's a much smaller vehicle.
Really?
Right. Yeah. The Tacoma is, the Tacoma. I think let me give you a good perspective on it. If you compare the current Tacoma to the current Hilux, it would be like comparing a mid-size truck to a full-size truck.
Really?
That's the difference. It's just a much smaller, much tighter.
It's a shame they don't sell that here.
Yeah,
you see that with the Maverick, right? The Ford Maverick is going crazy.
That was my first thought. Plus the Hilux name, because of Top Gear and because of has become this like forbidden fruit, and they could slot it underneath. The other thing that I keep harping about is they should make a Lexus version of the Tundra.
Yeah.
Right, all those guys
Yeah.
in Texas who walk into their, with their wives,
Yeah.
LX into the Lexus dealership, and none of you would do it. They would do a double take, like, golly, what's that?
Didn't Cadillac years ago? Cadillac did a Cadillac version of the Chevy
Cadillac
Avalanche.
did the XTC.
Yeah.
And Lincoln did the Blackwood.
Yeah.
The Blackwood
that's
was two-wheel drive.
Yeah.
So, and the Cadillac was just kind of funky.
Yeah.
Right, it had that like Avalanche, what do they call it, the third tailgate or whatever, the firewall in the back that came down.
Yeah.
But I think Lexus would sell the pants off of a Lexus version of the Tundra.
Sure. I've heard a very popular YouTuber, I won't mention by name.
You can mention it, please.
Okay, Doug DeMuro had a video when they discontinued the Land Cruiser wear, and he's a not notorious Land Cruiser owner, but he's a serial Land Cruiser owner, and he had made the point about the Land Cruiser, which was, the people who buy Land Cruisers are people who don't want the Lexus badge on purpose, and his understanding description of it made a lot of sense, right? You get executives who don't want to be seen as too kind of flashy. You see driving down the road at 60 miles an hour, there's a Sequoia coming at you and there's a 200 series Land Cruiser coming at you. Except for very small minor details, the two vehicles kind of look the same, and you don't think, they're, especially with the later Heritage editions, you don't think, there's 110 grand rolling down the road, right? So
it's like the equivalent of jeans, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody wears jeans.
Yeah.
And you could walk around in jeans and not be like, he's trying to put on airs.
And this may be wishful thinking. I have a theory, which is I think Toyota is going to use the Land Cruiser model name in the U.S. to do the next off-roader. To have the Bronco come back and have just the Bronco go nuts. I think it makes sense for Toyota to do, and if it's not, they talk about it being the next FJ and all that stuff. I think it'll be something comparable to the 4Runner in terms of price, but something that's more kind of purpose-built. And their whole thing's going to be, we're going back to the 70s, right? When it was the FJ40 versus the Bronco versus, the Wrangler, the CJ, whatever, it makes so much sense to do that. But they're such a cautious company that it's one of those things where, and we did a video about my LC500, when Toyota does something exciting like that, it's so rare that you're like, well, I can't believe they did that.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest innovation they've brought to the table is, their Synergy hybrid drive, right?
Right.
But that's about it.
Right, and that was 20 years ago with the Prius. Yeah. So no, it might be wishful thinking on my part, but I think it makes so much sense to your very early point in the chat about, they discontinued the FJ at the wrong, perfectly wrong time. It makes so much sense for them to bring back something. So then
you saw that, right? Mm-hmm. You saw like a month ago or 2 months ago, they had like their Akimo unveiled their entire future lineup.
Right.
And one of them was like a smaller version of the FJ, and it was all electric.
Yeah. And I'm so glad, because I saw it. You see a picture of that on its own, and you think, wow, that looks like a lot like an FJ. They're bringing the FJ back as an electric. And then there was another photo where it was parked next to what is obviously a Tacoma or a Hilux with all the electrification stuff. And the FJ was a noticeably smaller vehicle. And that's when I saw that, I immediately dismissed, because you saw the articles in the.
It was like Jimny
about,
size. We don't get the Jimny,
right?
But yeah, it was like that size.
A Jeep Liberty or whatever,
yeah.
And it's like, that's a body on frame CVT, doesn't have a transfer case, like soft rotor, for hip young people to drive to the mall.
Yeah, so they look cool.
But if I had not seen the two photos of them next to each other showing the scale difference, I wouldn't have known that. But just on its own, it's like, whoa, look at that, it's another FJ. But then you see it next to the truck, and it's like, that's not a vehicle to take seriously for the off-road market anyway. So.
Yeah, and we've got hopefully a bunch of truck off-roaders coming this year. So we've got the Hummer EV, we've got the Rivian, which we've tested, we've got the Lightning. At some point we'll have the Silverado EV, and I think electrification and off-roading make a lot of sense. Jeep's got the 4xe, now they're going to do the Grand Cherokee 4xe, and it's really nice to be out there with instant torque and no engine noise, right? Just really enjoying like the brook that's running next door to the trail, or the birds, right? Because obviously a lot of people have now equated off-roading with big V8s, which is also fun. Both are good.
Right.
But it'll be nice to kind of have the flip side of the coin.
Yeah, I've been interested to see. So the Rivian famously, and I have a good friend of mine who's a big Rivian fan, so that's how I know most of what I know about the Rivian, and then watching you guys as well.
And let me just, full disclosure, you just sold your Tesla Model Y.
That's correct. Yeah, I sold it last year, probably 3-4 months ago.
Yeah. So you're very familiar with.
Yeah. And I from A to B, I got to drive around town as a daily driver. I love electrics, right?
Yep.
I love how cheap they are to run. Mine, the Teslas are obviously
your house is a gas station,
right? Yeah. I mean, the if you daily drive one of these things, it becomes strange anytime you go to the gas station after that. But mine, the Teslas are obviously performance oriented. And even still, I was getting. I did the math one time, and I was like, okay, what does gas cost me? What does electricity cost me? What's the rough equivalent? And if gas was $2.50 a gallon, I was getting the equivalent of 85 miles to the gallon in my Tesla. So it was a fantastically efficient vehicle to be a driver, and I love it for that. I'm actually when I sold the Model Y, I just sold it just to kind of cash in on all the craziness right now. But I sold it.
As one would.
Yes. But I sold it also too, thinking if I get to the point where I need another daily driver, because so many of us are working from home now, if I get to the point where I need another daily driver, then I would look at the new BZ4X from Toyota, which seems like a more efficiency-minded electric rather than a performance-minded electric. The amount of full throttle acceleration that my wife did in my Tesla was surprising.
Terrifying.
Yeah. And she would tell me stories about taking it to work or taking it to base, and and then driving it around and getting some of her junior enlisted in the back and just like, all right, you guys ready? Whoa, and I didn't.
That's a trick that never gets old.
Yeah, it never gets old because it's so unique to the electrics versus the gas vehicles. Right. But no, I if I were to get an electric, my most likely next electric would be the BZ4X.
Yeah,
just as a good daily bet.
Yeah. And I hope that now that we have a bunch of electric trucks coming, at some point, somebody's going to start actually not just off-roading trucks, but off-roading cars as well. And so obviously Rivian will probably be first because they've got the SUV that's coming.
Yeah.
But I think we're there's that Chinese saying, right? May you live in interesting times.
Yeah.
And we are living in interesting times.
Yeah. The thing for me, from an off-road perspective, from the Rivian, that's super interesting. Most of what defines kind of the differences between off-roaders is the traction tech, right? Lockers, or in the Jeep, it's the Jeep version of A-Track, and the Toyota is called BLD, brake lock differential, right? And when you go to a vehicle that, like the Rivian, is 4 independent motors, there's no more locking differentials. There's no more traction. I mean, there's traction control from a slip perspective, but there's no more like mechanical limitations of like what this thing can do off-road.
There is a part of me that is a little sad because with air suspension, there's also no more modding.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, it's kind of like these are like giant Tinker toys, and you can do what you want with them, make them your own. Like think of it as a Harley off-road, right?
Right.
I think with the electric vehicles, I was just listening to actually another podcast, Inside EVs, and they were talking about this German company that modifies Teslas, but all they do are like stuff that I wouldn't like. You can put a center screen on it, or you can take that silly yoke from the Model S and put it. This is like You know what I mean? That doesn't. It's all like cosmetic. None of it is functional.
Yeah. And I think part of that is because of the integration. Those are so much more tightly integrated vehicles than these are. Some of that might be too from the fact that Ford, Chevy aside, right? The folks making those vehicles. You look at Tesla and you look at like Rivian. These are not large car companies that make a lot of different vehicles, that share parts across a lot of different vehicles where, the same suspension parts that'll fit on a 4Runner will fit on a Lexus GX, So, once the aftermarket gets there, I have a friend who actually, his wife did not like the stock suspension on her Model Y. So I've done a performance suspension change on a Model Y, not performance, to make it more soft. But it was, the suspension.
The suspension on the Model Y is horrible. I'm sorry.
You had a performance.
Yeah, I thought it was horrible.
Yeah.
I thought it in a straight line, it was fine. Around a corner. Anyway, we've gone far afield from Toyota.
Sure.
Wouldn't that be cool if actually a company could make, like, the cool thing about electric vehicles is they're just a rolling chassis, right? It's just a chassis with a battery and then
skateboard, right? They usually call it.
Wouldn't that be cool if you could actually do that and then make the parts so you can integrate them or exchange them or swap them? Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah.
Kind of like a smart car Trd, you know what I mean? So you could actually
Yeah.
like take that skateboard and make it into an off-roader.
Yeah, and you do see those modded vehicles where it's like, here's a Corvette that's got a Tesla powertrain in it,
Right.
and things like that. But yeah, the amount of integration that it takes to get that to work, I can't even imagine.
Well, James, thank you very much for taking the time.
Sure.
It was a fun conversation. I don't know what I'm going to do with our FJ. We don't collect cars. We buy them so that we can feature them in videos, and we've recently featured that again. But I think it's time for that guy to go. So
Yeah.
I think if you're interested in our FJ, let me know, because I think we're going to be probably selling it. Like I said, we don't collect cars. I'm going to miss it. My biggest fear is selling it and not being able to replace it. Right, that's one that's going to be hard to replace.
Right.
But having said that, once again, we're a review company. We're not Jay Leno's garage.
Yeah, and interestingly, I had to make a modification to the buy-sell guide in the last few years, where in the last 18 months or so, where the first thing, if you're a potential buyer of an FJ, the first section 3A of the buy-sell guide is you should probably be looking at a Lexus GX instead, and that's something to consider for you guys. I mean, the GX is a vehicle that was $60,000 brand new.
I know they're just right now the bee's knees when it comes to overlanding.
Yeah.
Tons of payload, affordable. And the Land Cruisers, old Land Cruisers, 100 series or even the 80s. Those are just all like through the roof.
Yeah.
Especially the ones you want with the lockers, through the roof. But the GX is still affordable if changing quickly.
Something to think about for you guys. You could straight trade that FJ for one.
Yes, we could. Yes, I can take it to the Lexus dealer.
Right.
Give us. I think a new one. A new one is like what? They're like
right.
They're like
Well,
60.
They're like 60. Yeah. Something used with a
a couple of years old.
30,000 miles.
Yeah, you don't want to take a new one off
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah. Here's my 8-year-old FJ. Trade me this thing for that 2017, and the dealer's going to look at that and go, yeah. But no, in the real world, you could do that. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, James. Really appreciate it, guys. Thank you for watching. Remember, if you want to check out TFL content, it's all in one place, tfl-studios.com, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Ron.
Ciao.
Good to chat.